Let me start with something that sounds simple but isn't. Honestly, some people don't keep giving second chances because they're too forgiving. They give second chances because they learned very early that relationships are supposed to hurt. And when something hurts in a familiar way, it doesn't feel like a warning. It feels like home. This pattern shows up quietly in adult life. The friend who cancels plans repeatedly but always has a reason. The partner who apologizes beautifully but changes nothing. The family member who takes but never gives, who criticizes but never celebrates, who shows up only when they need something. And the person giving the chances sees all of this. They are not blind. They notice the pattern. They feel the weight of it, but they give another chance anyway. From the outside, this looks like kindness. It looks like patience, like compassion, like loyalty, and there is kindness in it. But beneath the kindness is something else, something older. A belief learned so early it doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like truth. The belief that love is supposed to require this much effort, that relationships are supposed to hurt sometimes, that if you just wait long enough, try hard enough, understand deeply enough, the person will finally become who they promised to be. This is not about being too nice. It is about what the nervous system recognizes as safe. Because here is what most people misunderstand. They think the person giving endless second chances doesn't see the red flags. They do. They think the person is naive about human nature. They're not. They think the person lacks boundaries or self-respect. But that's not it either. The person giving second chances is often deeply intelligent, emotionally aware, capable of seeing patterns in others with clarity. The confusion is not about perception. It is about what feels normal. When you grow up in an environment where love was inconsistent, where affection had to be earned, where connection required constant management, your nervous system learns a specific lesson. It learns that relationships require vigilance, that closeness comes with conditions, that the people you love will hurt you, and your job is to understand why and adapt accordingly. So when an adult relationship follows this pattern, it doesn't feel wrong, it feels familiar. And familiarity, to a nervous system trained in childhood, feels safer than the unknown. They see the red flags. They feel the discomfort. They give another chance anyway. This is the part that confuses people who didn't learn this lesson. They ask, "Why don't you just leave?" As if leaving were a simple calculation, as if the decision lived only in the mind. But it doesn't. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the old wiring that says staying and trying is safer than leaving and facing the unknown. Because the unknown to someone raised on inconsistent love feels more dangerous than the pain they already know. There is also the hope, not the hope that exists in fairy tales, but the hope that was conditioned into them as children. The hope that says, if I just do this one more thing, if I'm just patient enough, understanding enough, giving enough, the person will finally see my worth and treat me accordingly. This hope is not naive. It is the same hope that helped them survive childhood, the hope that kept them trying when a parent was unpredictable, when a caregiver was emotionally absent, when love felt conditional. That hope worked then. It kept them connected. It kept them safe. So the hope continues into adulthood, even when the context has changed, even when the trying is no longer protection, but erosion. What if they're just going through a hard time? What if I'm expecting too much? What if leaving makes me the bad person? The internal questions sound like compassion, and they are compassionate, but they are also the questions a child learns to ask when they need to make sense of pain that shouldn't be their responsibility to manage. When a child experiences inconsistent love, they don't conclude that the love is flawed. They conclude that they are. They ask themselves what they did wrong, what they can do better, how they can earn the consistency they need. This is not a character flaw. This is an adaptation. Children are wired to maintain connection because connection is survival, so they adapt their understanding to preserve the relationship. And that adaptation doesn't disappear in adulthood. It transfers. The person who gives second chances to the wrong people is not choosing poorly. They are choosing familiarly. They are drawn to dynamics that echo what they know, even when what they know hurt them. Because familiarity feels like recognition, and recognition feels like belonging, and belonging, even painful belonging, feels safer than solitude, not because they consciously prefer pain, because their system was never taught that love could be easy. This is why they may meet someone kind, someone consistent, someone who shows up without needing to be convinced, and feel nothing. Or worse, feel suspicious. The nervous system scans for familiar patterns. Kindness without effort feels wrong. Affection without anxiety feels shallow. Relationships without tension feel boring. Not because they are, but because ease was never part of the original blueprint. Intensity was. Effort was. The feeling of constantly reaching for someone who was intermittently available. That intensity gets confused with depth. That effort gets confused with love. So when someone shows up easily, the system doesn't recognize it as good. It recognizes it as unfamiliar. And unfamiliar in the logic of trauma equals unsafe. This pattern is not about a single relationship. It is about all of them. The romantic partner who promises change but delivers disappointment. The friend who takes emotional labor but offers none in return. The family member who guilts but never acknowledges. The colleague who exploits but never credits. Different people, different contexts, but the same underlying dynamic. The dynamic where the person giving chances is always trying, always hoping, always believing that this time will be different. This time the effort will be met with reciprocity. This time the love will stabilize. But the love doesn't stabilize, because the love was never unstable due to lack of effort. It was unstable because the other person is unavailable, unwilling, or unable, and no amount of patience can change that. But this realization takes time, sometimes years, because the pattern is reinforced by intermittent rewards. The apology that feels genuine, the moment of connection that feels real, the glimpse of the person they could be if only circumstances were different, if only timing were better, or if only they themselves were more understanding. These moments are not imagined, they happen, but they are not the pattern, they are the exception. And the person giving second chances focuses on the exception, not the pattern, because the exception is where hope lives. The exception is what made childhood bearable. The good moments with an inconsistent parent, the days when love felt secure, those moments created a template that says, if I wait long enough, if I try hard enough. The good moments will become the norm. They don't. This pattern begins long before the second chance is given. It begins in childhood, when a child learns a very specific lesson about love. That lesson determines everything that follows. How they interpret others' behavior, what they tolerate in the name of connection, how long they wait for someone to change, how much they sacrifice to keep a relationship alive. The second chance is just the visible part. Beneath it is an entire architecture of belief, built early, reinforced often, and carried quietly into every relationship they enter. And here is where the pattern starts to make sense. When you understand what this person learned about relationships as a child, the second chances stop looking like poor judgment. They look like loyalty to an old promise. The promise that if you just keep trying, love will eventually feel safe. That promise was made to a child who needed it, but the adult is still keeping it, even so the context has changed, even though the cost has become unbearable. Because breaking that promise feels like betraying the child they were. The child who survived by believing that effort could earn consistency, that patience could create safety, that one more chance might finally be the one that works. The child who later gives endless second chances often grew up in an environment where love was unpredictable, not absent, unpredictable. And unpredictability creates a very specific kind of hope. Because when love is consistent, a child learns to trust it. When love is absent, a child learns to live without it. But when love is unpredictable, when it appears and disappears according to rules the child cannot see or control, the child learns something different. They learn to chase it. They learn to study it. They learn to believe that if they can just figure out the pattern, they can make the love stay. This is where second chances are born. The child may have had a parent who was warm one day, distant the next, present in their morning, unreachable by evening, affectionate after a good day at work, irritable after a bad one. The love was real, but it was conditional on factors the child could not predict or control. So the child began to monitor. They watched for signs. They learned to read moods before words were spoken. They became experts at detecting shifts in emotional temperature, at sensing when to approach and when to retreat, at adjusting their behavior to match the climate of the household. This is not a skill children should need, but it is a skill they develop when safety requires it. Some children grew up with a parent who praised extravagantly one moment and criticized harshly the next. The praise felt wonderful. It created a feeling of being seen, valued, loved. But the criticism that followed felt like erasure, and the child could not understand what changed. What did I do wrong? What was different? How do I get back to the praise? The child learned to chase the praise, to work for it, to believe that love was something earned through performance. And when the criticism came, the child did not conclude that the parent was inconsistent. The child concluded that they had failed. Children do not have the capacity to hold their caregivers accountable for inconsistency. They hold themselves accountable instead. There is also the parent who was emotionally available only during crisis or only during calm. The child who could access their parent's attention by struggling got a very specific message. Struggle equals connection. The child who could only reach their parent when things were smooth got a different message. Neediness equals distance. Both children learn to manage themselves around the parent's capacity, rather than trusting the parent to manage themselves around the child's needs. This is backwards, but it becomes the foundation. Another quiet effect of this dynamic is that the child begins to lose touch with their own needs, because needs became risky. Expressing a need might push the parent away. Expressing hurt might be met with defensiveness or dismissal. Expressing anger might result in punishment or withdrawal of affection. So the child learns to suppress, to minimize, to adapt. They become low maintenance, easy, agreeable, not because they have no needs, but because having needs feels dangerous. And this becomes the blueprint for adult relationships. When this child grows up, they do not consciously think, I should find people who are inconsistent and try to earn their love. They simply feel drawn to dynamics that mirror what they know. The person who is sometimes available and sometimes distant feels more real than the person who is consistently present. The relationship that requires effort feels more meaningful than the relationship that flows easily. The love that has to be earned feels more valuable than the love that is freely given. Not because they want to suffer, because their nervous system was trained to recognize intermittent connection as normal. There is a term in psychology for this: intermittent reinforcement. It is the most powerful form of conditioning. When a behavior is rewarded unpredictably, the behavior becomes more persistent, not less. A child who receives consistent love learns to trust it. A child who receives no love learns to cope without it. But a child who receives unpredictable love, who sometimes gets what they need and sometimes does not, becomes fixated on figuring out how to make the love consistent. They try harder, they monitor more closely, they blame themselves when it disappears and credit themselves when it returns. This creates a very specific kind of hope, the hope that says, if I can just find the right combination, the love will stabilize. But the love doesn't stabilize because the instability was never about the child's behavior. It was about the parent's capacity, the parent who was overwhelmed, or dealing with their own trauma, or struggling with mental health, or simply unable to provide consistent emotional presence. The child could not have fixed this. But the child believed they could, and that belief, that if I just try harder everything will be okay, becomes the operating system for adult relationships. They watch, they adapt, they try to earn what should be freely given. The child also learned something about the good moments, the moments when the parent was fully present, fully affectionate, fully attuned. Those moments felt extraordinary. They felt like proof that the parent was capable of love, that the relationship could work, that the effort was worth it. The child held on to those moments. They replayed them. They used them as evidence that underneath the inconsistency was a parent who truly cared. And this is not wrong. The parent may have truly cared, but care alone does not create consistency. Capacity does. and the parent lacked the capacity to be consistent. But the child does not understand capacity. The child understands effort, so the child keeps trying. This is why, as adults, people who give endless second chances often focus on potential rather than pattern. They remember the good moments. They hold on to the version of the person that appeared during these moments. They believe that version is the real person, and the hurtful version is the aberration. But actually, both versions are real. The question is not which one is real. The question is which one is consistent. And if the hurtful version appears more often than the kind version, that is the pattern. But the person giving chances has been trained since childhood to focus on the exception, not the rule, because the exception is where hope lives. Another important piece of this dynamic is how the child learned to interpret love. In a healthy environment, love is communicated through consistency, attunement, and reliability. The child learns that they are valued simply for existing. But in an environment where love was unpredictable, the child learns that love is something that appears and disappears based on factors outside their control. So they start to believe that love is supposed to be difficult, that if it comes easily, it is not real, that struggle is proof of depth. This belief does not feel like a belief. It feels like truth. So when an adult relationship requires constant effort, when it involves frequent misunderstandings that need repair, when it cycles between closeness and distance, the person does not think, quote 2, they think, quote 3. The difficulty feels like evidence of authenticity. The need to work for connection feels normal, and relationships that do not require this level of effort feel flat, or boring, or superficial. They are not. They are stable. But stability was not part of the original template. The child who grew up with unpredictable love also learned to take responsibility for things that were not their responsibility. When the parent was distant, the child wondered what they did wrong. When the parent was angry, the child searched for their mistake. When the parent withdrew affection, the child asked themselves how to win it back. This teaches the child that other people's emotional states are their responsibility to manage, that if someone is upset, it is their job to fix it, that if someone pulls away, it is their job to bring them back. This is not true, but it becomes the foundation of how they relate. So in adult relationships, they automatically take responsibility for the other person's behaviour. If their partner is distant, they ask what they did wrong. If their friend cancels plans repeatedly, they wonder if they are demanding too much. If their family member criticises them, they search for what they could have done differently. They absorb blame that is not theirs. They carry emotional weight that belongs to someone else, and they do this without realizing it, because it is simply how they learn to maintain connection. If I take responsibility, I maintain control. If I maintain control, I can fix this. But some things cannot be fixed by trying harder. Some things are broken in the other person, not in the dynamic. Some people are not available for the kind of relationship that requires mutual effort, mutual accountability, mutual care. But the person who learned to chase unpredictable love cannot see this easily. They see potential. They see glimpses. They see good moments. And they believe that if they can just be patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough, the good moments will become the norm. This is the specific kind of hope that unpredictability creates. The hope that you can earn consistency through effort. There is also how the child learns to define their worth. When love is consistent, a child internalizes that they are inherently valuable. When love is unpredictable, a child internalizes that their value is conditional. They are worthy when they do the right thing, when they meet the right standard, when they manage to keep the love present. This creates a very fragile sense of self, because self-worth becomes dependent on external validation. The child grows into an adult who needs constant reassurance, who reads deeply into small interactions, who experiences minor rejection as catastrophic. Not because they are needy, because their worth was always tied to whether someone else chose to show up. So when they give second chances, they are not just giving the other person another opportunity, they are giving themselves another opportunity to prove their worth. If I can make this relationship work, it means I am valuable. If this person finally treats me well, it means I was always deserving. The second chance is not about generosity, it is about validation. And validation, for someone who learned that worth is conditional, feels like survival. This is why leaving feels impossible. Leaving means accepting that the effort did not work. And if the effort did not work, what does that say about them? In the logic of childhood conditioning, it says they were not enough, not patient enough, not understanding enough, not lovable enough. The adult may consciously know this is not true, but the nervous system, trained in childhood, interprets leaving as confirmation of the worst fear, that they were the problem all along, so they stay. Not because they want to, because staying feels safer than facing that fear. Another layer of this pattern is how the child learned to manage disappointment. When love is unpredictable, disappointment becomes frequent. The parent forgets a promise. The parent misses an event. The parent is emotionally unavailable when the child needs them. The child experiences this disappointment over and over, and because the child needs to maintain connection, they learn to minimize the disappointment. They tell themselves it is not a big deal. They make excuses for the parent. They lower their expectations. This becomes automatic in adulthood. When someone disappoints them, they immediately minimize it. They make excuses. They lower their expectations. They tell themselves they were asking for too much. This is not compassion. This is self-protection. Because if they allowed themselves to feel the full weight of the disappointment, they would have to confront how often they are being let down. And confronting that would require action. It would require boundaries. It would require the possibility of ending the relationship. And ending relationships feels dangerous to someone whose survival once depended on maintaining them. So they minimize, they excuse, they give another chance, because another chance means they do not have to face the deeper truth, that the relationship may not be fixable, that the other person may not be capable of meeting their needs, that they may need to walk away. The child who grew up with unpredictable love also learned a distorted relationship with their own emotions. When the parent's mood determined the household's emotional climate, the child learned to suppress emotions that might destabilize the parent. Anger might provoke the parent. Sadness might burden the parent. Excitement might irritate the parent. So the child learned to flatten, to manage, to perform emotional stability even when they felt anything but stable. This training does not disappear in adulthood. They become adults who struggle to access their own anger, who feel guilty for having needs, who cannot express hurt without softening it, who apologize for taking up space. And in relationships, this makes them easy to take advantage of, because they have been trained to prioritize the other person's emotional experience over their own. They absorb the impact of someone else's behavior without expressing its effect. They forgive without requiring accountability. They move forward without resolution. This is not maturity. This is learned minimization. The child learned one more thing that shapes everything that follows. They learned that their job was to make the relationship work, not the parent's job, theirs. If the relationship felt strained, the child tried harder. If the parent was distant, the child adjusted their behavior. If the connection felt fragile, the child took responsibility for strengthening it. This is backwards. Children should not be responsible for maintaining relationships with adults. But when adults are inconsistent, children fill the gap. And this becomes the adult pattern. They enter relationships believing that if the relationship struggles, it is their responsibility to fix it. They do not expect mutuality. They do not expect the other person to meet them halfway. They expect to do the majority of the emotional labor, the majority of the adapting, the majority of the trying. And when they give second chances, they are continuing this pattern. They are taking responsibility for someone else's growth, someone else's healing, someone else's capacity to show up. But you cannot grow for someone else. You cannot heal someone else. You cannot make someone capable of something they are not ready or willing to do. The child who was taught to chase unpredictable love grows into an adult who is still chasing. They are chasing the feeling of finally being enough, finally earning the consistent love they needed, finally proving that the effort was worth it. But they are chasing something that cannot be caught through effort, because the inconsistency was never about their worthiness. It was about the other person's capacity. And no amount of patience, understanding, or second chances can change another person's capacity. That work belongs to them. But this realization comes slowly, because the hope, once formed, is difficult to release. The hope that this time will be different, that this person will change, that the effort will finally be rewarded. That hope is not naive. It is the same hope that helped them survive childhood. It kept them connected when connection felt fragile. It kept them trying when trying was the only strategy they had. The question is no longer whether the hope made sense then. It did. The question is whether it serves them now. And often, it does not. But recognizing that requires something painful. It requires grieving the childhood that trained them to hope this way, It requires acknowledging that the love they needed was never going to come from trying harder. It was supposed to be given freely, and it was not their fault that it was not. This is where the story begins to shift, not in childhood, in the recognition of what childhood taught them. Because once you see the pattern, once you understand where it came from, it stops feeling like a personal failing. It starts feeling like a learned response. And learned responses can be examined, they can be questioned, they can, slowly and with great difficulty, be unlearned. Here is what most people misunderstand about second chances. They think it is a decision made in the mind. In reality, it is often a response from the nervous system, and the nervous system does not care about logic. It cares about what feels familiar. When someone who grew up with unpredictable love encounters a relationship that follows the same pattern, their body recognizes it, not consciously, somatically. The nervous system scans every interaction for threat or safety, and it categorizes safety not based on what is healthy, but based on what is known. So a relationship that cycles between closeness and distance, between affection and withdrawal, between promise and disappointment, does not trigger alarm. It triggers recognition. This is home. This is what love feels like. The nervous system was shaped by early experience. If early experience taught that love comes with anxiety, then love without anxiety does not register as love. It registers as something unfamiliar, and the unfamiliar, in the language of the body, equals danger. So the person may meet someone who is kind, consistent, emotionally available and feel nothing. Or they may feel interested briefly and then feel an inexplicable urge to pull away. The mind may think, quote, 4, but the body feels flat, unengaged. The chemistry is not there, but the chemistry is there with the person who is inconsistent, the person who is sometimes warm and sometimes cold, the person who pursues and then withdraws, the person who makes promises and then breaks them. With this person, the body lights up. There is tension. There is longing. There is the feeling of trying to reach someone who is just out of reach. And this feeling, this anxious striving, gets interpreted as attraction. It is not attraction. It is activation. The nervous system is responding to a familiar pattern, and because that pattern was paired with love in childhood, the body interprets the pattern as love in adulthood. This is why people often say, quote, 5. The feeling is real, but the feeling is not about the person. It is about the pattern the person represents. The body is not falling in love with who this person is. The body is responding to what this person's behavior recreates. The old familiar cycle of hope and disappointment, closeness and distance, effort and frustration. And that cycle, learned early, feels like love because it was the only version of love the nervous system knew. There is also something that happens neurologically during the cycle of rupture and repair. When there is conflict or distance in a relationship, the body experiences stress. Cortisol rises. The person feels anxious, hypervigilant, desperate to fix things. This state is deeply uncomfortable. Then, when reconciliation happens, when the other person apologizes or returns or shows affection, the body floods with relief. dopamine is released. The person feels euphoric. The contrast between the distress and the relief creates an intense emotional high. This high is addictive. It is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The unpredictability of the reward creates a stronger bond than predictable reward ever could. If you press a button and receive a reward every time, you quickly lose interest. But if you press a button and sometimes receive a reward and sometimes do not, you become obsessed with pressing the button. You keep trying. You keep hoping. The unpredictability creates compulsion. This is what intermittent reinforcement does in relationships. When someone is consistently kind, the nervous system adjusts. It feels safe. It relaxes. There is no high, no desperate longing, no cycle of tension and release. Just steady, calm presence. And for someone whose nervous system was trained on unpredictability, this feels wrong. It feels boring. It feels like something is missing. What is missing is the chemical rush of reconciliation after conflict. What is missing is the relief that comes after anxiety. What is missing is the high that makes the lows feel worth enduring. But that high is not love. It is a trauma response. The person giving second chances is not choosing based on what is healthy. They are choosing based on what activates their nervous system in a familiar way. And the familiar way involves pain, so they mistake pain for depth. They mistake anxiety for chemistry. They mistake the cycle for connection. And they give second chances because each reconciliation delivers the neurochemical reward that their system has learned to crave. Another layer of this is how the nervous system interprets calm. For someone who grew up in an environment where calm was rare, or where calm preceded emotional storms, calm feels suspicious. The body does not relax into calm. The body braces during calm. It waits for the other shoe to drop. This is hypervigilance. The nervous system learned that peace is temporary, that it is often followed by conflict, that it cannot be trusted. So when a relationship is calm, the body stays alert. It scans for problems. It anticipates rupture. And sometimes, when the anticipation becomes unbearable, the person creates rupture, not consciously. But they pick a fight, or they withdraw, or they create drama, because the tension of waiting for something to go wrong is more distressing than the conflict itself. At least during conflict, they know where they stand. At least during conflict, the nervous system can do what it was trained to do: manage, adapt, repair. Calm offers no role. Calm just is. And being, without doing, feels intolerable to a system trained on vigilance. This is why leaving someone who is wrong for them feels more dangerous than staying. Leaving requires tolerating the unknown. The unknown is not just about whether they will find someone else, or whether they will be alone. The unknown is about what their nervous system will do without the familiar cycle to manage. Because managing the cycle, as painful as it is, gives them something to focus on. It gives them a sense of control. It gives them a role. If I can just figure out what they need, if I can just be more patient, if I can just communicate better, things will improve. This belief is not delusional. It is the same belief that helped them as children. When they could not control their parents' mood, they controlled their own behavior. When they could not make the parent consistent, they made themselves adaptable. The effort gave them agency in a situation where they had little power, and the effort sometimes worked, at least temporarily. The parent sometimes responded. The connection sometimes stabilized, if only briefly. So the nervous system learned effort equals control, and control equals safety. But in adult relationships, this is not true. You cannot control another person's capacity for consistency. You cannot manage someone into emotional availability. You cannot effort your way into a healthy dynamic when the other person is not participating. But the nervous system does not know this. The nervous system is still operating on childhood rules. And the childhood rule was, if you try hard enough, love will stabilize. So they keep trying, not because they are foolish, because their body believes that stopping is dangerous. There is also what happens in the body during the decision to give another chance. Often, when someone is considering ending a relationship, they experience intense physical anxiety. Tight chest, shallow breathing, racing heart, nausea. The body is in alarm, and the alarm is not just about losing the person. The alarm is about violating the old survival strategy, because ending the relationship means admitting that effort was not enough. And if effort is not enough, what does that mean about their ability to keep themselves safe? The nervous system interprets this as life-threatening, so when they decide to give another chance, when they choose to stay, the anxiety decreases, the body relaxes. This relief reinforces the decision. The nervous system registers, staying equals safety, leaving equals threat, and this happens over and over. Each time they consider leaving, the body panics. Each time they decide to stay, the body calms. The pattern becomes deeply conditioned. The mind may know the relationship is harmful, but the body has learned that staying is survival, and the body, when it comes to decisions about safety, often overrides the mind. One of the most painful aspects of this dynamic is that the person is often aware of what is happening. They can see the pattern. They can articulate why the relationship is not working. They can list the reasons they should leave. But knowing does not translate to leaving, because leaving requires the nervous system to feel safe enough to let go. And the nervous system does not feel safe. It feels terrified. This is not weakness. This is biology. The nervous system was wired in childhood to associate certain patterns with connection. And connection, for a child, is survival. So even when the connection is painful, even when the connection is harming them, the nervous system clings to it. Because the alternative, disconnection, was once existentially threatening. The child who lost connection with their caregiver faced real danger. The adult no longer faces that danger, but the nervous system has not updated its threat assessment. It still believes that being alone is the worst possible outcome. There is also the way the nervous system responds to the other person's apologies. When someone who has hurt them apologizes, especially if the apology is heartfelt or emotional, the person's body often responds with immediate relief. The apology signals that the rupture is ending, that reconnection is possible, that the painful distance is closing. This relief is so powerful that it overrides memory. The person forgets temporarily how many times this has happened before. They forget the pattern. They focus on the feeling, and the feeling is relief. Relief becomes confused with resolution, but relief is just the nervous system returning to baseline after a period of activation. It is not evidence that anything has changed. It is not evidence that the apology will be followed by different behavior. It is just the body's response to the end of immediate threat. And because relief feels so good after prolonged distress, the person gives another chance. Not because they believe things will truly be different, because their body is so hungry for the relief that it will accept the promise, even if the promise has been broken repeatedly. The body does not care about patterns, it cares about immediate regulation. Another element is how the nervous system bonds through shared stress. This is called trauma bonding. When two people go through repeated cycles of conflict and reconciliation, their nervous systems become entrained to each other. The relationship is not bonded through joy or ease. It is bonded through the shared experience of distress and relief. This creates a very strong attachment, stronger in some ways than attachments formed through consistent positive experience, because the highs feel higher when they follow deep lows. The person may feel more connected to someone who hurts them and then comforts them than to someone who simply does not hurt them in the first place. This is not because they prefer pain. This is because their nervous system has learned to bond through the cycle of pain and repair. The repair feels like love. The pain feels like the price of that. And the cycle, though exhausting, feels like connection. It is connection, but it is not healthy connection. It is bonding through dysregulation. This is why people often say they feel addicted to the person who is wrong for them. They are describing a real physiological phenomenon. The nervous system has become dependent on the cycle. It craves the dopamine hit of reconciliation. It craves the relief after anxiety. It craves the intensity that comes from instability. And when the relationship ends, or when they try to create distance, the body goes into withdrawal. Actual physical withdrawal. Anxiety spikes. Sleep is disrupted. The person obsesses. They feel unbearable longing. This is not evidence that the relationship was right. This is evidence that the nervous system was attached to the pattern. And withdrawal, though painful, is temporary. But the person in withdrawal does not know this. They only know that the pain is unbearable, so they reach out. They give another chance. And the moment they reconnect, the withdrawal symptoms disappear. The nervous system calms. This reinforces the belief that the relationship is necessary, that the person cannot survive without it, that the pain of separation is proof of love. But it is not proof of love. It is proof of attachment. An attachment, especially when formed through trauma, does not require love. It only requires familiarity. The nervous system also plays a role in how the person interprets the other person's behavior. When someone is inconsistent, the person's nervous system stays activated. Activated nervous systems are hypervigilant. They scan constantly for signs of threat or safety. So the person becomes obsessed with analysing the other person's behaviour. They read into texts, they track response times, they analyse tone, they search for hidden meaning. This level of analysis is exhausting, but it also feels necessary, because if I can just understand them, I can predict them. And if I can predict them, I can control the outcome. But this is an illusion. The other person's behavior is not a puzzle to solve. It is a pattern to recognize, and the pattern is inconsistency. But the nervous system, trained in childhood to believe that understanding leads to safety, keeps searching for the key, the one insight that will make everything make sense, the one change in approach that will make the person show up differently. That key does not exist, but the searching continues, because searching feels active, and activity feels safer than acceptance. This is why people often feel more anxious in calm, healthy relationships than in chaotic ones. In a chaotic relationship, the nervous system is activated, but it has a role. It gets to analyze, strategize, manage, fix. In a calm relationship, there is nothing to fix. The nervous system has no job, and a nervous system with no job does not rest. It creates problems. It manufactures worry. It finds things to obsess over. Because rest, for a nervous system trained on vigilance, feels like danger. The body also stores the memory of relational pain in a way the mind does not. The mind can rationalize, it can minimize, it can forget. But the body remembers. It remembers the feeling of waiting for a text that never came. It remembers the feeling of being dismissed when vulnerable. It remembers the feeling of hoping and being disappointed. These memories are stored somatically, and when the person considers giving another chance, the body may respond with resistance, heaviness, fatigue, a sense of dread. This is the body trying to protect them, but the mind overrides the body. The mind says, quote, 6, and the person gives another chance despite what the body knows. This creates a split. The mind and body are in conflict, and this conflict is exhausting. It creates a specific kind of fatigue, not just tiredness, depletion, the feeling of being worn down from the inside, because they are at war with themselves. One of the most important things to understand about the nervous system's role in this pattern is that it is not permanent. The nervous system is adaptable. It learned these patterns, it can learn new ones. But unlearning requires something the person has been avoiding. It requires feeling the discomfort of the unfamiliar without running back to the familiar. It requires sitting with the anxiety of calm instead of creating chaos. It requires allowing the body to learn, slowly, that safety can exist without hypervigilance, that connection can exist without pain, that love can be steady instead of volatile. This relearning does not happen quickly. The nervous system changes slowly. It needs repeated experiences of safety before it begins to trust safety. It needs consistent evidence that calm is not a precursor to storm. It needs time to detach the neurochemical reward from the cycle of rupture and repair and to find reward in steadiness instead. But this is possible. The body is not fixed, it is responsive, and when given enough safe experiences, it begins to shift its baseline. The anxiety decreases, the craving for intensity lessens, the tolerance for calm increases. But getting to this point requires making choices that feel wrong at first, choices that the nervous system resists, choices like walking away from the person who activates the old pattern even when the body is screaming to stay, Because sometimes the thing that feels like safety is actually the thing preventing safety from being rebuilt. This is not just about thought. It is not about convincing yourself that you deserve better or that the relationship is unhealthy. You can know these things intellectually and still be unable to leave, because the decision does not live in the intellect alone. It lives in the nervous system, and the nervous system needs more than knowledge. It needs new experience. It needs to feel in the body that leaving does not lead to annihilation, that calm does not lead to catastrophe, that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. And these things cannot be thought into existence. They have to be lived. This is why healing from this pattern is so difficult. You're not just changing your mind, you're retraining your entire physiological response to love. You're teaching your body that the old pattern, though familiar, is not safe. And you are teaching it slowly that the new pattern, though unfamiliar, can be trusted. This requires patience. It requires compassion. It requires the willingness to feel uncomfortable for longer than the nervous system wants to tolerate. But on the other side of that discomfort is something the person has never experienced: a relationship, first with themselves and eventually with another, that does not require constant vigilance, that does not activate alarm, that allows the body to rest. And rest, though foreign, is what the nervous system has needed all along. But before that rest can happen, there is the mind. The thoughts that justify, the narratives that sustain, the beliefs that keep the pattern alive. Because the nervous system is not working alone. It is working in tandem with a cognitive architecture built in childhood, refined in adolescence, and operating automatically in adulthood. And that architecture has its own logic, its own rules, its own way of interpreting reality. Understanding how the mind participates in this pattern is just as crucial as understanding how the body does. One of the most painful aspects of this pattern is not what the person feels, but what they believe. Because the beliefs are intelligent. They make sense given what was learned, but they serve the old pattern, not the actual person. The person who gives endless second chances often engages in what psychologists call potential thinking. They do not see the person in front of them. They see who that person could be. They see the version that appears occasionally, during the good moments, during the apologies, during the brief windows of closeness, and they believe that version is the real person. The hurtful version, the dismissive version, the unavailable version, those are aberrations caused by stress or trauma or circumstances. If those external factors could be removed, the real person would emerge consistently. This is not how people work. People show you who they are through patterns, not moments. The real person is the one who appears most often, not the one who appears occasionally. But potential thinking focuses on the exception and dismisses the rule. It focuses on what could be and ignores what is. And this focus on potential is not naive. It is a skill the person developed in childhood. When their parent was inconsistent, they learned to hold on to the good moments as evidence that the parent was capable of love. This helped them maintain hope. This helped them keep trying. But what was adaptive in childhood becomes destructive in adulthood. Because in adult relationships, you are not required to parent the other person. You are not required to see their potential and wait patiently for them to reach it. You're allowed to evaluate them based on their current consistent behavior. But the person who was trained to focus on potential cannot do this easily. They see clearly, but they interpret what they see through the lens of what could be instead of what is. If they are struggling, they just need time. If they are hurtful, they just need healing. If they are unavailable, they just need patience. The narrative always returns to, they need something from me, and if I provide it, they will change. There is also a specific cognitive distortion that sustains this pattern. Psychologists call it personalization. The person giving second chances takes responsibility for things that are not their responsibility. When the other person behaves poorly, they ask, "What did I do to cause this?" When the other person withdraws, they wonder, "What could I have done differently?" When the relationship struggles, they assume it is because they are not doing enough. This is not humility. This is a distortion learned in childhood. When a child experiences a parent's inconsistency, they cannot conclude that the parent is the problem. Their survival depends on the parent, so they conclude that they are the problem. They search for what they did wrong. They adjust their behavior. They take responsibility for the parent's emotional state. This gives the child a sense of control in a situation where they have very little power. But this sense of control is an illusion, and it becomes a trap in adulthood. The adult continues to take responsibility for other people's behavior. They continue to believe that if they could just communicate better, be more understanding, be less needy, be more supportive, the other person would show up differently. They run through an endless list of what they could have done. They obsess over their mistakes. They blame themselves for the other person's lack of effort. What if I had been calmer? What if I had given them more space? What if I had not brought it up? The questions are endless, and each question reinforces the belief that the relationship's problems are fixable through their effort alone. But this is not true. Relationships require two people. If one person is doing all the adjusting, all the understanding, all the forgiving, the relationship is not mutual. It is one person trying to compensate for another person's lack of participation. But the person giving chances cannot see this. They see only their own behavior. And they believe that if they perfect their behavior, the other person will respond. Another belief that sustains this pattern is the equation between effort and value. The person believes, often unconsciously, that if they stop trying, the relationship will end. And if the relationship ends, it means they were not valuable enough to fight for. This belief is devastating, because it ties their worth to their ability to maintain a relationship that may not be maintainable. They think, if I give up now, it means I was not enough. But this is backwards. The relationship is not struggling because they are not enough. The relationship is struggling because the other person is not capable of or willing to participate in a healthy dynamic. But the person giving chances learned in childhood that their value was conditional, that they had to earn love through effort. So when a relationship requires constant effort with minimal return, They do not see this as evidence that the relationship is unbalanced. They see this as evidence that they need to try harder. And the trying becomes a way to prove worth. There is also the way they minimize harm and maximize good moments. When the other person does something hurtful, they downplay it. It was not that bad. I am too sensitive. They did not mean it that way. When the other person does something kind, they hold on to it as evidence that the relationship is good. See, they do care. They are trying. This is proof that things are changing. This is not balanced perception. This is motivated reasoning. The mind is working to preserve the relationship, so it adjusts the interpretation of events to support that goal. Harm is minimized, so it does not require action. Kindness is amplified, so it justifies staying. And over time, the person loses the ability to accurately assess the relationship. They cannot see it clearly because clarity would require acknowledging how imbalanced it is. And acknowledging that would require making a decision they are not ready to make. So the mind protects them from clarity, but this protection comes at a cost. Another cognitive pattern is the if only. If only they were not so stressed at work. If only their family were more supportive. If only they had more time. If only they had dealt with their trauma. If only circumstances were different. The person giving chances creates a narrative where the relationship would work if external factors changed. And this narrative allows them to stay hopeful, because maybe those factors will change, maybe the stress will ease, maybe the circumstances will improve. But often the external factors are not the issue. The issue is the person's capacity, and capacity does not change because circumstances change. Capacity changes because the person does internal work, and internal work cannot be done by someone else. It has to be chosen by the person who needs to grow. But the person giving chances believes that if they are patient enough, if they create the right conditions, the other person will change. This is not faith in the person. This is faith in their own ability to manage someone else's growth. And this faith is misplaced. You cannot grow someone else. You can support them if they are growing themselves, but you cannot do the work for them. The person also engages in what is called selective memory. They remember the good moments with vivid detail, the time the person showed up when it mattered, the apology that felt genuine, the weekend where everything felt right. These memories are recalled often. They are used as evidence that the relationship has potential, that the person is capable of love, that their effort is worth it. But the painful moments are minimized in memory. The times the person did not show up, the apologies that were not followed by change, the weeks of distance and disconnection. These are forgotten or reframed. They were going through something. I was being demanding. It was not that bad. This is not dishonesty. This is how the mind protects hope. Because if the painful moments were remembered with the same clarity as the good moments, the pattern would be undeniable. And denying the pattern allows the person to keep trying. So the mind selectively remembers, selectively forgets, selectively interprets, and this keeps the hope alive. But hope in this context is not healthy, it is avoidance. Avoidance of the truth that the relationship as it currently exists is not meeting their needs. avoidance of the reality that the other person is not changing despite the chances given, avoidance of the decision that needs to be made. There is also a belief that leaving equals giving up, and giving up feels like failure. The person has invested time, energy, emotion into this relationship. They have endured pain. They have forgiven repeatedly. If they leave now, it feels like all of that was for nothing. So they stay, not because the relationship is good, but because leaving would mean acknowledging that the investment did not pay off. This is the sunk cost fallacy, and it is powerful. The person thinks, I have already given so much. If I leave now, I lose everything I put in. But if I stay, maybe it will eventually work, and then the effort will have been worth it. But this logic is flawed. The effort already happened. It cannot be recovered by staying. And staying in a harmful relationship does not validate the effort. It compounds the loss. Because now they are not just losing what they already invested, they are losing what they could be investing elsewhere, in themselves, in relationships that are mutual, in experiences that are nourishing. But seeing this requires stepping outside the sunk cost thinking. And that is difficult when the mind is committed to making the investment worthwhile. Another belief is that their empathy obligates them to stay. They see the other person's pain, they understand the other person's trauma, they recognize the other person's struggles, and they believe that if they truly care, they will stay and help. That leaving someone who is struggling is cruel. That giving up on someone is unloving. This confuses empathy with enabling. Empathy is understanding someone's pain. Enabling is tolerating harm because you understand where it comes from. You can have empathy for someone's struggles and still maintain boundaries. You can recognize that someone is in pain and still refuse to be the target of their pain. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice. But the person giving endless chances believes it does. They think, if I really loved them, I would stay. If I really cared, I would keep trying. But love does not mean absorbing someone else's dysfunction. Love does not mean allowing yourself to be hurt repeatedly because the other person is hurting. Healthy love includes boundaries. It includes accountability. It includes the expectation that both people will participate in creating a safe dynamic. But the person who learned to equate love with effort believes that boundaries are selfish, that accountability is harsh, that expecting mutuality is demanding, so they stay, they absorb, they keep trying, and they call this love. It is not love. It is self-abandonment. There is also the way they apply different standards to themselves versus the other person. When they make a mistake, they are unforgiving. They analyze what they did wrong. They blame themselves. They vow to do better. But when the other person makes a mistake, they are immediately forgiving. They make excuses. They minimize. They extend endless grace. This double standard is not accidental. It reflects the belief that their value is conditional and the other person's value is inherent. They have to earn the right to be treated well by being perfect. But the other person deserves to be treated well regardless of their behavior. This is the internalized message from childhood, that they had to be good to be loved, but love from others did not have to be earned. It just was when it appeared. And when it did not appear, it was because they were not good enough. So they hold themselves to impossible standards and the other person to no standards. And this imbalance is maintained through the cognitive architecture built long ago. The mind also engages in future-focused thinking to avoid present-focused truth. The person does not ask, quote 13, they ask, quote 14, the focus is always on the future, on potential, on what might happen if circumstances change, if the person heals, if time passes. This keeps them locked in waiting for the future version of the relationship that may never arrive. And while they wait, the present continues to harm them, but the present is dismissed as temporary. The future is where hope lives, and hope, in this context, is a way to avoid grief. Because acknowledging that the relationship is not healthy now requires grieving the relationship they wanted, and grief feels unbearable, so they focus on the future, on possibility, on potential. And this focus allows them to avoid the present reality. But the present is where they live, and the present is where the harm is happening. One more cognitive distortion is the belief that the other person's behavior is a reflection of their own adequacy. If the person treats them well, it means they are worthy. If the person treats them poorly, it means they are not. This ties their self-worth to someone else's behavior. And this is a catastrophic equation, because it means they are constantly trying to control something they cannot control. They are trying to be good enough, patient enough, understanding enough to make the other person treat them well. But the other person's behavior is not determined by their adequacy. It is determined by the other person's capacity, choices, and patterns. But the person giving chances cannot separate these. They believe that if they were better, the other person would do better. And this belief keeps them trapped in a cycle of self-blame and endless effort. The mind, like the nervous system, is not operating randomly. It is following rules learned in childhood, rules that once helped them make sense of confusing dynamics, rules that allowed them to maintain hope when hope was necessary for survival. But those rules are no longer serving them. They are now the architecture of their suffering. And this architecture is evident not just in how they think about one relationship. It is evident in how the pattern repeats across different types of relationships, because the wound does not discriminate. It shows up everywhere. The person who gives second chances to the wrong people does not give them equally everywhere. The pattern has favorites. It appears most clearly in the relationships that echo childhood most closely. In romantic relationships, the pattern is often the most visible, because romantic relationships are where attachment is most activated. The person may find themselves repeatedly drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable, not unavailable in obvious ways, unavailable in subtle ways. The partner who is present physically but distant emotionally. The partner who is affectionate sometimes but withdrawn often. The partner who makes promises but does not follow through. The cycle becomes familiar. There is pursuit. There is brief connection. There is withdrawal. There is longing. There is reconciliation. And the cycle repeats. The person giving chances believes that if they can just be patient enough, understanding enough, the partner will finally become emotionally available consistently. But emotional availability is not created by patience. It is created by internal work the partner must choose to do, and often, the partner is not choosing to do that work. The person may stay in the relationship for years, waiting, hoping, adjusting themselves to accommodate the partner's limitations. They suppress their own needs because expressing needs creates distance. They minimize their hurt because expressing hurt leads to defensiveness. They perform understanding even when they do not understand. And over time, they lose themselves in the process of managing the relationship. But the relationship does not improve, it stabilizes in dysfunction, and the person becomes so used to the dysfunction that they can no longer recognize it as abnormal. They think all relationships require effort, all relationships have challenges, this is just what love looks like. But this is not what love looks like. This is what learned tolerance of harm looks like. In romantic relationships, the person also often confuses intensity with intimacy. Because the relationship is emotionally volatile, it feels deep. The highs are euphoric, the lows are devastating. The constant emotional activation creates a sense of significance. But intensity is not intimacy. Intimacy is being known. Intensity is being activated. An activation, while compelling, is not connection. There is also the sexual component. For some people, the physical relationship remains strong even when the emotional relationship is dysfunctional. This creates confusion. They think, but we have chemistry, but the connection is still there, and they interpret physical chemistry as evidence that the relationship is viable. But physical chemistry can exist alongside emotional unavailability. The body can respond to someone even when the heart is being neglected. And this response is often the trauma bond expressing itself physically. The person may also engage in caretaking that masquerades as partnership. They become the therapist, the cheerleader, the manager of the partner's emotions. They anticipate the partner's needs. They make accommodations. They do the emotional labor for both people. And they believe this is love. They believe this is what partnership requires. But partnership requires mutuality. And this dynamic is not mutual. It is one person over-functioning and one person under-functioning. And the more the person over-functions, the more the partner under-functions. Because the partner does not have to develop their own capacity. The person giving chances is compensating for them. This creates a dynamic where the person feels indispensable. And feeling indispensable feels like being valued, but it is not. It is being used. In friendships, the pattern shows up differently, but the core is the same. The person may have a friend who takes but does not give. The friend who calls only in crisis. The friend who vents but does not listen. The friend who cancels plans repeatedly, but expects the person to always be available when it is convenient. The person giving chances makes excuses for this friend. They are going through a hard time. They are busy. They do not mean to be one-sided. And the person continues to show up. They continue to give. They continue to prioritize the friendship even when the friendship does not prioritize them. Because ending the friendship would mean acknowledging that it was never mutual. And that acknowledgement is painful. There is also the friend who is subtly competitive or subtly undermining. The friend who celebrates the person's failures more than their successes. The friend who gives advice that keeps the person small. The friend who needs the person to be struggling so they can feel superior. The person sees this sometimes, but they dismiss it. They tell themselves they are being paranoid. They tell themselves the friend cares, just in a complicated way. But care is not complicated. Care is consistent. And this friendship is not caring. It is extractive. The person may stay in these friendships for years, partly because they do not trust their own perceptions, partly because they believe that loyalty means staying even when someone is not treating them well, partly because they fear being alone, and partly because the dynamic feels familiar. They are used to relationships where they give more than they receive. It feels normal, but normal is not the same as healthy. In family relationships, the pattern can be the most entrenched, because family relationships are the original template. The person may have a parent who was inconsistent in childhood and remains inconsistent in adulthood. The parent who shows up for some things but not others. The parent who is critical more often than supportive. The parent who expects the person to manage the relationship, to call, to visit, to try. While the parent makes a little effort in return, the person continues to try. They continue to hope that one day the parent will see them, acknowledge them, value them consistently. They give chance after chance. They forgive repeatedly. They make themselves available even when the parent is not available in return. Because this is their parent, and the child, even the adult child, still hopes that the parent will change. But the parent is unlikely to change, not because the person is not worthy of that change, but because the parent would have to acknowledge their own patterns. And most people resist that level of self-examination, especially when they can continue to receive effort without having to give it. So the person stays in the relationship. They participate in family events even when they leave feeling unseen. They answer phone calls even when the conversations are one-sided. They show up even when showing up depletes them. And they tell themselves that this is what family means. But family should not mean tolerating harm. There is also the sibling who takes advantage, the sibling who borrows money and does not repay it, the sibling who asks for help but never offers it, the sibling who creates drama and expects the person to manage it. The person gives chances because they believe that siblings should support each other, but support is supposed to be mutual, and this relationship is not. The person may also encounter this pattern in professional settings. They may have a boss who promises opportunities but never delivers, who praises in private but criticizes in public, who takes credit for the person's work but does not acknowledge their contributions. The person stays in the job. They tell themselves it is just how workplaces are. They tell themselves they need to be patient. They tell themselves that if they just work harder, the boss will eventually recognize their value. But recognition that has to be earned through extraordinary effort is not recognition. It is exploitation. Or they may have a colleague who relies on them constantly but never reciprocates, who asks for help with projects but is unavailable when the person needs support, who takes but does not give. The person continues to help, they continue to be available, because they believe that being helpful makes them valuable. But being helpful to someone who does not value you does not create value. It creates resentment, and the person may not acknowledge the resentment. They may suppress it. They may tell themselves they are being petty, but the resentment is information. It is the signal that something is imbalanced, but the person has been trained to ignore that signal. What connects all these relationships is not the other person's behavior. What connects them is the familiar feeling of trying to earn something that should be given freely. Recognition, respect, basic consideration. The contexts change. The hoping does not. And here is what makes this pattern so costly. It is not just about the relationships that hurt. It is about what gets lost while managing those relationships. Time, energy, selfhood. One of the most devastating effects is how this pattern quietly erases the person giving the chances. What no one tells you about giving endless second chances is that you are not just giving away opportunities for the other person to do better. You are spending something finite, yourself. Every time the person gives another chance, they are making a choice. They are choosing to invest more time, more energy, more hope into a relationship that is not reciprocating. And that time, that energy, that hope could be spent elsewhere, on relationships that are mutual, on goals that are meaningful, on healing that is necessary. But it is not. It is being poured into a dynamic that is not changing, and slowly the person begins to disappear. One of the first things that erodes is self-trust. The person says to themselves, quote 15, but then they do it one more time, and the person does not leave. They give another chance. This happens repeatedly. Each time, the person sets a boundary in their mind, and each time they do not enforce it. Over time, they stop trusting their own words. They stop believing their own limits. They learn that their boundaries are negotiable, not to the other person, to themselves. This creates a deep internal fracture. They know what they should do, but they do not do it. And the gap between knowing and doing widens. They feel weak. They feel ashamed. They blame themselves for not being able to leave. But they do not understand that the inability to leave is not a character flaw. It is the result of the nervous system patterns and cognitive distortions that were built in childhood. But self-blame is easier than self-understanding, so they blame themselves, and the self-blame compounds the erosion. Another thing that erodes is their sense of identity. To maintain the relationship, they mold themselves to fit what the other person needs. They suppress parts of themselves that create friction. They perform versions of themselves that are more palatable. Over time, they lose touch with who they actually are. They know who they are in relation to the other person, but they do not know who they are separate from the other person. When did I stop having opinions? When did I stop asking for what I need? The questions surface occasionally, but they are quickly dismissed, because acknowledging how much of themselves they have lost would require acknowledging the cost of staying, and they are not ready to face that cost. There is also the erosion of the relationships, Because managing one dysfunctional relationship takes enormous energy, the person becomes less available to friends who would actually show up for them. They cancel plans because they are dealing with the latest crisis in the primary relationship. They withdraw because they do not have the capacity to be present elsewhere, and slowly, the healthy relationships fade. The friends stop calling as often. They stop inviting the person to things, not because they do not care, but because the person is never available, or when they are available, they are distracted talking about the relationship that is consuming them, and over time, those friends create distance, not maliciously, protectively. So the person ends up isolated. The only relationship they are actively maintaining is the one that is hurting them, and the isolation makes it harder to leave, because now if they leave, they will be alone. The other relationships have already faded, and rebuilding them feels overwhelming, so they stay, and the isolation deepens. The person also loses opportunities. Opportunities for growth, for new experiences, for connections with people who might actually be healthy for them. Because all their energy is spent managing the one relationship. They do not have the capacity to pursue new things. They do not have the emotional bandwidth to be open to new people. They are so focused on making the current relationship work that they miss everything else happening around them, and years pass. And when they finally look up, they realize how much time was spent in a relationship that was never going to change, time they cannot get back. There is also physical and emotional exhaustion. The person is tired. Not just tired from a busy day, depleted. The constant vigilance, the emotional labour, the hoping and being disappointed. It is all exhausting. They may struggle to sleep, they may struggle to eat. They may struggle to find joy in things that used to bring them joy, because the relationship is taking everything, and yet they keep trying. Because stopping feels like giving up, and giving up feels like failure. So they push through the exhaustion. They override the signals from their body that is telling them to stop, and the exhaustion becomes chronic, not just fatigue. A bone-deep weariness that rest does not fix. Another cost is the development of resentment. The person does not want to feel resentful. They want to be understanding. They want to be compassionate. They want to believe that their effort matters. But beneath the understanding is anger. Anger that they are trying so hard and receiving so little. Anger that the relationship is so one-sided. Anger that they keep giving chances and nothing changes. But they do not express the anger. They suppress it. Because expressing it feels mean. Expressing it feels like they are being unreasonable. Expressing it might push the other person away. So the anger goes underground, and it builds, and resentment, when buried, does not disappear. It waits, and it grows, and eventually it poisons the relationship from the inside. The person may find themselves being passive-aggressive, or withdrawing emotionally even while staying physically present, or feeling a quiet bitterness that they cannot articulate. The resentment leaks out in small ways, but they do not acknowledge it directly, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging how imbalanced the relationship is. The person also begins to lose their sense of worth, because the relationship keeps requiring more and more and giving less and less, and the person internalizes this. They think, if I were more valuable, the other person would treat me better. If I were more lovable, the other person would show up consistently. The relationship's dysfunction becomes evidence of their inadequacy. This is backwards. The relationship's dysfunction is evidence of the other person's incapacity. But the person who has been conditioned to take responsibility for others' behavior cannot see this. They see only their own shortcomings, and their self-worth erodes. There is also what happens to their relationship with themselves. They stop being kind to themselves. They become their own harshest critic. They speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to someone they love. Quote 16. The internal voice becomes cruel. This cruelty is often inherited. It is the voice of a caregiver who was critical, or the voice of a society that shames people for staying in difficult relationships, or the voice of their own frustration turned inward. But wherever it comes from, it compounds the harm, because now they are not just being hurt by the other person, they are hurting themselves. The person may also start to feel a deep sense of emptiness. They look at their life and feel hollow. They have achieved things. They have maintained the relationship. They have kept going. But none of it feels fulfilling, because fulfillment requires alignment, and they are not aligned with themselves. They are aligned with someone else's needs, someone else's limitations, someone else's pattern, and alignment with someone else, when it requires abandoning alignment with yourself, creates emptiness. Another effect is the loss of spontaneity and joy. The person becomes so focused on managing the relationship that they stop doing things just because they want to. Everything is calculated. Will this upset the other person? Will this create distance? Will this lead to conflict? They stop taking risks. They stop being playful. They stop allowing themselves to simply exist without worrying about the impact on the relationship, and life becomes heavy. The weight of constant management, constant adaptation, constant hoping. It is a specific kind of heaviness, not depression exactly, though it can lead to depression, more like the feeling of carrying something too large for too long and not being able to put it down, because putting it down would mean letting go of the relationship, and they are not ready. One of the most painful realizations is that the person they have been trying to save was never at risk. They were the one who needed protection. They were the one who needed someone to say, "This is not okay. You deserve better." But they did not have someone saying that. Or if they did not believe them. So they stayed. And they kept giving chances. And they kept losing pieces of themselves. Until one day they wake up and do not recognize their own life. This is not sacrifice. It is erasure. And the most tragic part is that the person often does not see how much they have lost until they are already deep in the loss. They do not realize how far they have drifted from themselves until they cannot find their way back easily. And by then, the cost of staying has become so high that leaving feels terrifying, not because the relationship is good, but because leaving would mean confronting everything they sacrifice for nothing. So they stay a little longer, and the erosion continues. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from realizing you have been so focused on someone else's potential that you neglected your own existence, not your potential, your existence. The version of you that needed protection was never them, it was you. And that grief, when it finally surfaces, is overwhelming. Because it is not just grief for the time lost. It is grief for the person you could have been if you had chosen differently. Grief for the relationships you let fade. Grief for the opportunities you missed. Grief for the voice you silenced. Grief for the boundaries you did not enforce. Grief for the self-respect you traded for the hope that someone would finally see you as valuable, but that hope was misplaced. Because your value was never conditional, it was inherent, and the person who could not see it was not worth the cost of trying to prove it. This is why healing does not begin with forgiving the other person one final time. It begins with something much harder. There is also the question beneath all of this that must be answered. Why? Why this person? Why this pattern? Here is the question that haunts many people who give second chances. Why can't I stop? And beneath that question is another. What am I actually trying to fix? Because on the surface, the person believes they are trying to fix the relationship, trying to make it work, trying to help the other person become their best self. But beneath that is something deeper. They are not trying to fix the relationship. They are trying to fix something from childhood. They are trying to rewrite a story that ended badly. And the person they are giving endless chances to is not just that person. They are a stand-in for the original wound. There is a psychological concept called repetition compulsion. It describes the unconscious drive to recreate painful dynamics from the past in an attempt to resolve them. The person is not consciously choosing to repeat the pattern, but some part of them, a part that was formed in childhood, believes that if they can make this relationship work, it will retroactively prove that they were always worthy of the love they did not receive consistently as a child. This is not logical. But trauma is not logical. The person who gives endless second chances is often trying to earn something they should have been given freely. They are trying to prove that if they are patient enough, understanding enough, loving enough, the other person will finally show up. And if this person shows up, it means the original caregiver could have shown up too. It means the problem was never the child. It means the love was always possible. But this is a fantasy. Because the original caregiver's inconsistency was not about the child's worthiness. It was about the caregiver's capacity. And the current person's inconsistency is not about the person's worthiness either. It is about their capacity. But the unconscious does not understand this distinction. It is still trying to solve the old problem. The person may also be trying to prove something to themselves. If I can make this difficult relationship work, it means I am capable. It means I am strong. It means I am valuable. The relationship becomes a test, and passing the test would mean they are enough. But relationships are not tests, and the harder a relationship is, the less it proves about your worth. Often, the hardest relationships are hard because the other person is unwilling to participate, and no amount of effort from one person can compensate for lack of effort from another. But the person who was conditioned to believe that love requires extraordinary effort cannot see this. There is also a deep fear underlying this pattern, the fear of abandonment. But not just the fear of being abandoned by the other person, the fear of abandoning the self they used to be, the child who tried so hard to earn love. If they give up on this relationship, it feels like giving up on that child. It feels like saying quote 18, and that feels unbearable. So they stay. They keep fighting, not for the current relationship, for the validation of the child they were. The child who believed that if they just tried hard enough, love would stabilize, and if this relationship works, it means that child's belief was correct. It means the effort was not wasted. It means they were not unlovable. But they were never unlovable. The love they received was inconsistent because the caregiver was inconsistent, not because the child was lacking. Another layer is loyalty, not loyalty to the person they are giving chances to, loyalty to the original attachment figure. Because giving up on this relationship can feel like giving up on the parent who was inconsistent. It can feel like a betrayal, like they are saying the parent was wrong, like they are abandoning the person who raised them. This is especially true if the person still has a relationship with the original caregiver. They may fear that choosing differently in their adult relationships is an implicit criticism of the caregiver, and criticizing the caregiver, even silently, feels dangerous. So they stay loyal to the pattern, because the pattern was the original relationship. And loyalty to the pattern feels like loyalty to the person who created it. There is also the belief that suffering makes love real. That if love comes easily, it is superficial. That if love is difficult, it is deep. This belief is common among people who grew up in environments where love was hard-won. They learned to associate difficulty with value. They learned that anything worth having requires struggle. And this belief transfers to relationships. The relationship that is easy feels shallow. The relationship that requires constant effort feels meaningful, not because it is meaningful, but because struggle has been equated with depth, and ease has been equated with superficiality. But this is backwards. Ease in a relationship is not evidence of shallowness. It is evidence of compatibility. It is evidence that both people are capable of showing up without constant friction. Difficulty in a relationship is not evidence of depth. It is evidence of incompatibility or dysfunction or both. But the person who learned to value difficulty cannot trust ease. The person may also be unconsciously recreating the dynamic to prove they can handle it. As a child, they could not leave. They were dependent, but as an adult they can leave, and yet they stay. And staying feels like power. It feels like they are choosing now, not being forced. It feels like they have control. But this is an illusion. Because if they were truly choosing freely, they would also be free to leave. And they are not. They are compelled to stay by patterns they do not fully understand. So the staying is not power, it is reenactment. There is also the savior complex, the belief that if they can fix this person, it proves their value. If they can help this person heal, it means they are worthy. The person becomes invested in the other person's growth. not because they care about the other person's growth for its own sake, but because the other person's growth would validate their effort. If they heal because of me, it means I matter. But healing someone else cannot give you worth. Worth is inherent, and tying your worth to someone else's transformation is a trap, because you cannot control another person's transformation. They have to choose it, and if they do not choose it, you cannot force it through patience or understanding or love. But the person with the savior complex believes they can. They believe that if they just love hard enough, the other person will change. And this belief keeps them locked in a dynamic where they are over-functioning and the other person is under-functioning. And the dynamic does not shift. Another piece is the fear of being alone, not just physically alone, but the existential aloneness that comes from acknowledging that no one is coming to save you, that you're responsible for yourself, that the validation you are seeking has to come from within. This is terrifying for someone who learned that worth is external, so they stay in the relationship. Because the relationship, even when it is painful, provides a distraction from that existential truth. It gives them something to focus on. It gives them a role. It gives them a reason to avoid looking inward. But looking inward is where healing lives. The person may also fear that if they leave this relationship, they will just repeat the pattern with someone else, and this fear is not unfounded. Without understanding the pattern, without healing the wound, the pattern will repeat. But the solution is not to stay in the current relationship. The solution is to do the work to heal so the pattern does not repeat. But that work feels overwhelming, so they stay, believing that at least with this person, they know what they are dealing with. At least with this person, the pain is familiar, and familiar pain feels safer than unknown healing. There is one more layer. The person may be trying to fix the relationship because fixing it would mean they were not wrong to stay this long. If the relationship eventually works, it validates all the time they spent. It validates all the pain they endured. It validates the choice to keep trying. But if the relationship does not work, it means they wasted time. It means they endured pain for nothing. It means they were wrong to stay. And that is a devastating realization. So they keep trying, not because they believe it will work, but because admitting it will not work would mean admitting they should have left long ago. And that admission feels like self-betrayal, but staying is also self-betrayal. Because staying means continuing to neglect their own needs, their own worth, their own life. The second chances they keep giving to the wrong people are not about generosity. They are about completion. The unconscious hope that if this time works, all the previous times make sense. But completion cannot come from another person. It can only come from turning toward yourself. And this is why healing requires something radical. Not another chance for them. Another relationship with yourself. There is also the beginning of the shift, which does not feel like strength at first. It feels like grief. Healing from the pattern of giving endless second chances does not begin with a decision. It begins with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that makes you realize you have been running towards someone who is walking away. The person may not be able to name it at first. They just know they are tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind of tired that lives in the bones, that makes getting out of bed feel heavy, that makes the thought of giving one more chance feel unbearable instead of hopeful. This is the body arriving at a truth the mind has been avoiding. The exhaustion is not weakness, it is information. It is the accumulation of every disappointment, every broken promise, every moment of feeling unseen. The body has been keeping score even when the mind was minimizing, and now the body is refusing to continue. This is often when the person begins to see the pattern, not just in this relationship, in all their relationships. They begin to notice how often they are the one trying, the one accommodating, the one hoping. They begin to see that this is not isolated. This is their strategy, and the strategy is costing them everything. But seeing the pattern does not immediately lead to change, because seeing it also means confronting how long it has been happening. How many years they have spent this way, how much of themselves they have lost, and that confrontation brings grief. Grief for the time that is gone, grief for the relationships that could have been different, grief for the person they could have been if they had not been so busy trying to earn love that should have been freely given. This grief is necessary, but it is also destabilizing, because grief requires feeling, and the person has been avoiding feeling for a long time. They have been managing, strategizing, hoping. Feeling was too risky. Feeling might have meant acknowledging the pain, and acknowledging the pain might have meant having to leave. But now the pain is undeniable, and the grief arrives. The person may cry in ways they have not cried before. Not neat, contained crying, but the kind of crying that comes from deep in the body. The kind that is not just about this relationship, but about all the relationships, about the childhood, about the belief that they had to earn what they should have received, about the realization that they have been betraying themselves for years. This grief may come in waves. Some days it is overwhelming, some days it is quiet, but it is persistent, and it needs space. The person needs to allow it, not to rush through it, not to suppress it with positivity or distraction, but to simply let it be, because grief is how the body releases what it has been carrying. Another part of healing is learning to sit with the discomfort of not fixing. The person has been conditioned to manage, to adapt, to solve. When the relationship struggles, they spring into action, they analyze what went wrong, they adjust their behavior, they reach out, they try harder. This is automatic. But healing requires learning to stop, to not reach out, to not adjust, to not manage, to simply sit with the discomfort of letting things be. This is excruciating at first, because the discomfort feels like something is wrong. The person feels the urge to fix it, to make it better, to restore equilibrium. But the equilibrium they are used to is not healthy. It is the equilibrium of dysfunction, and maintaining it requires their constant effort. So learning to stop means tolerating the feeling that everything is falling apart, and trusting that falling apart might be necessary. The person may need to practice this in small ways first, not responding immediately to a text, not explaining themselves when they set a boundary, not apologizing when they have done nothing wrong. Each small act of not fixing feels monumental, but each one is also practice. Practice in trusting that relationships do not require constant management to survive. Practice in trusting that their worth is not tied to how much they do for others. Practice in simply being instead of constantly doing. There is also the work of redefining what love means, because for the person who has been giving endless second chances, love has meant effort, love has meant patience, love has meant enduring, but this is not what love is. Love is also ease, love is also reciprocity, love is also someone showing up without being convinced, love is also feeling safe instead of anxious, love is also rest instead of vigilance. This redefinition does not happen quickly. The old definition is deeply ingrained. But the person can begin to notice when love feels like effort and ask themselves if that is truly what they want. They can begin to notice when love feels like peace and allow themselves to trust it instead of dismiss it. This is uncomfortable because peace feels unfamiliar. The nervous system scans peace for threat. The mind searches for what is wrong. But gradually, with practice, peace can begin to feel less suspicious and more like safety. The person also needs to learn to recognize the old pattern when it appears. The familiar pull towards someone who is inconsistent. The familiar feeling of trying to earn someone's attention. The familiar hope that this time will be different. These feelings will arise. The conditioning does not disappear immediately, but the person can learn to notice the feelings without following them. They can say, "This is the old pattern." They can say, "This feels familiar, but familiar is not the same as healthy." They can say, "I do not have to act on this feeling. This is not easy. The feelings are strong. The pull is magnetic." But noticing creates space, and space creates choice. Another crucial step is learning to grieve what they hoped for, not what was. What they hoped for, the version of the relationship they believed was possible, the version of the person they believed existed beneath the dysfunction, the future they imagined if only things could change. That future is not coming, and acknowledging that is painful, but it is also liberating, because hoping for that future has kept them stuck. Letting go of the hope means letting go of the waiting, and letting go of the waiting means their life can begin again. The person may also need to forgive themselves, not for staying, but for the harshness with which they have judged themselves for staying, for the cruelty of the internal voice that asked, "Why are you so weak?" For the shame they have carried for not being able to leave sooner. They were not weak, they were conditioned, and conditioning is powerful. It is not overcome through willpower alone. It is overcome through understanding, through compassion, through the slow work of retraining the nervous system and rewriting the cognitive patterns. Forgiving themselves does not mean condoning the pattern. It means recognizing that they did the best they could with the tools they had, and now they are learning new tools. This self-forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is ongoing. The harsh voice will return. The shame will resurface. But each time the person can meet it with compassion instead of agreement. They can say, I was doing my best. They can say, I am learning. They can say, I am allowed to grow. There is also the practical reality of ending the relationship if that is what needs to happen. And for many people it does. The relationship cannot be healed because the other person is not participating in healing. The relationship cannot become mutual because the other person is not capable of mutuality. And staying is no longer sustainable, but leaving is terrifying. Not just because of what they are leaving, but because of what they are stepping into. The unknown, the possibility of being alone, the fear that they will not find anything better, the fear that they will repeat the pattern with someone else. These fears are real, and they need to be acknowledged, but they cannot be the reason to stay, because staying guarantees continued harm. Leaving offers the possibility of something different. And possibility, though uncertain, is better than guaranteed harm. The person may need support to leave. They may need friends to remind them why they are leaving when the loneliness becomes unbearable. They may need a therapist to help them process the grief and the fear. They may need to write down the reasons they are leaving and read them when they feel the pull to return. Because the pull to return will be strong. The nervous system will panic. The mind will rationalize. The person will remember the good moments and forget the pattern. This is normal. This is the old wiring trying to reassert itself, but the person can expect this, and expecting it makes it less powerful. Healing also requires learning what healthy love actually feels like. And this is difficult for someone who has never experienced it consistently. They may need to start with how they treat themselves. They may need to practice being kind to themselves, speaking to themselves gently, allowing themselves rest, forgiving themselves for mistakes. This is the foundation, because if they cannot treat themselves with kindness, they will not recognize kindness from others as valuable. They will dismiss it as weak or boring or insufficient. But kindness is not weak. Kindness is the foundation of healthy love. The person may also begin to notice that they feel uncomfortable when someone treats them well without them having to earn it. They may feel suspicious. They may feel undeserving. They may feel the urge to push the person away. This is the old pattern resisting the new one. But they can notice this too. They can say, "This feels uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar." But unfamiliar is not the same as wrong. And they can practice staying. Practice allowing someone to be kind without having to prove their worth. Practice trusting that kindness can be genuine. Another important shift is learning to ask, "Is this aligned with who I am?" instead of "How do I make this work?" The old question kept them focused on the other person. The new question brings them back to themselves. Am I being true to myself in this relationship? Am I honoring my values? Am I respecting my own needs? These questions are harder to ask because they require knowing who they are. And the person who has spent years molding themselves to fit others' needs may not know anymore. But they can learn. They can start small. What do I actually like? What feels meaningful to me? What do I need to feel safe? These questions sound simple, but for someone who has spent years focused outward, they are revolutionary, and answering them is the beginning of returning home to themselves. One of the most powerful moments in healing is when the person realizes something quietly transformative. They realize that the second chances they kept giving to the wrong people were practice. Practice for the moment they would finally give one to themselves, not a second chance to stay in the pattern, a first chance to choose differently. The person who once gave endless second chances does not become someone who never forgives. They become someone who forgives from a place of choice, not compulsion. They learn the difference, and the difference changes everything. They learn that forgiveness does not require staying in a relationship that harms them, that understanding someone's pain does not obligate them to absorb that pain, that empathy can coexist with boundaries, that love can include letting go. These are not easy lessons. They go against everything the person was conditioned to believe, but they are true, and living in truth, even when it is painful, is less damaging than living in a pattern that slowly erases you. The person also learns that they are allowed to prioritize themselves, not in a selfish way, in a necessary way. They are allowed to ask, "What do I need?" before asking, "What does the other person need?" They are allowed to consider their own well-being before considering someone else's potential. This feels radical at first. It feels wrong. But it is not wrong. It is overdue. And slowly the person begins to change. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually, gently, with awareness. They begin to notice when they are slipping into old patterns. They begin to catch themselves before giving chances that should not be given. They begin to trust their own perceptions instead of doubting them. They begin to choose relationships that feel safe instead of relationships that feel familiar. And at first, safe feels wrong. But over time, safe begins to feel like home. Not the home they grew up in, the home they are building now. The healing is not linear. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when the old pattern resurfaces, when they find themselves drawn to someone who is unavailable, when they find themselves making excuses for behavior that should not be excused, when they find themselves hoping instead of seeing. But now they notice, and noticing creates space for choice. They can choose differently, not because they are healed, but because they are healing. And healing is not a destination. It is a practice of turning toward yourself instead of away, a practice of trusting your own worth instead of seeking proof of it from others. A practice of allowing love to be easy instead of insisting it be hard. The person who was taught that love requires endless effort grows into someone who understands that real love requires presence, not performance. That real love is reciprocal, not one-sided. That real love allows rest, not just striving. And one day, without noticing exactly when it happened, the person realizes something. They realize they have not given a second chance in a while, not because they have become harsh, but because they have become discerning. They have learned to see patterns instead of potential. They have learned to honor what is instead of hoping for what could be. And this shift is not about the other person changing. It is about them changing their relationship with themselves. The question is no longer, quote 31 quote. The question becomes, and, quote, 32. And when the answer is no, they leave, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. And that clarity, hard won and long delayed, is the beginning of a different kind of life. A life where they are no longer waiting for someone else to see their worth, because they see it. A life where they are no longer trying to earn love that should be freely given, because they give it to themselves. A life where they are no longer focused on someone else's potential, because they are focused on their own presence. The child who learned that love requires endless effort grew into an adult who believed that if they just tried harder, relationships would work. But that child can learn something new now. Not that trying does not matter. That worthiness was never conditional. The second chances they kept giving to the wrong people were practice. Practice for the moment they would finally give one to themselves. And that moment, when it comes, is not loud. It is quiet. It is simply the decision to stop running toward people who are walking away and to turn, finally, toward the one person who was waiting all along. Yourself. Not the version you hoped to become. The one who existed before you learned that love required proof. And that person, the one you have been searching for in others, has been here the whole time, waiting, not for another chance, for the first real one.